Hey guys, so this is a 3-month review of my 2014 Ram Ecodiesel Laramie Limited. It's got 16,000 kilometers on it, and I wanted to go through some things that I found out about the truck over my driving time. The first thing I want to mention is there's a lot of comments on our YouTube forum site there with regards to the four-wheel drive system, the powertrain. There is an issue with the system though, however, that I've picked up on, and if you read the forum sites, guys are complaining about it. For some reason, the front differential, or the transfer case in the front of the four-wheel drive system, when you're driving or when you're turning a sharp radius, so when you're turning right, you get a clicking noise on the front end of the truck. Now guys are complaining about it, saying that it's a problem. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's the system, the actual transfer case is engaging, because for most of the time, the rear end is driving the vehicle, not the front end. And obviously when traction's lost and slips, the front end transfer case kicks in. And you will get some clicking noises on the front end, only when you're turning right. And that's the majority of guys on the forum sites complaining about the same side. So I think that's the main issue. So now another issue that we've found on the forum sites, and this is all from ram1500diesel.com, is there's a lot of blow-by entering the Ecodiesel engine. And what I mean by that is this engine has a PCV valve line, positive crankcase ventilation system, and that's on most diesel trucks. And obviously if you are a diesel mechanic or know anything about diesels, blow-by is a much bigger problem than a gasoline engine. And in order to control the blow-by, you got to have a sensor to control it, to make sure that the pressures are always the same. And to monitor, a system always has to monitor it to ensure that there are no problems with your drivetrain. So I'm going to take off this cover right now and show you where the problem lies. Now again, I've had my truck for about 16,000 kilometers. It's gone in for service for this problem. I actually installed an oil catch can on my truck because, like I said, on the forum sites we found an issue with the truck. I tried to solve the problem myself because I've done it with gasoline engines, and I've completely disrupted the system, and I actually caused my oil gasket pan to leak. So it ended up being a big problem. So right now I'm still at factory setup. This is just to show you guys that the problem does exist. So this is a new hose that Chrysler installed. They reinstalled the system. There's a PCV assembly that's inside here. I'm going to open up and show you. And I'm going to show you how wet it is. So simply, if you guys you'll see there's like a pop clip, like a plastic pop clip. If you squeeze on it and disconnect it, you look inside there, just take your pinky finger and wipe it. That's oil. So what's happening is the positive crankcase ventilation system, how it works is if there's any debris that's stuck on the top of the heads, it sucks it out, sort of thing. And the way it sucks it out is it's actually getting its suction from the intake. And what's happening is whatever's coming out of the engine on the top is getting recirculated back into the engine, which is a problem because the intake system is now tied into the intercooler, and then from the intercooler, well actually, sorry, the intake system's tied into the turbo at first, then through the intercooler, and then from the intercooler back into your engine. So you're actually getting soot buildup in the turbo and into the intercooler. Now because our turbos on this engine, it's a Garrett turbo, it's a completely sealed bearing system, so oil's not going to be damaging the turbo anytime soon, and I'm sure the engineers kind of figured that out and, you know, and manufacture the turbo to last. However, the problem lies in the intercooler. Over time, if this oil residue sits at the bottom of the intercooler, it's actually going to collect, and you're going to lose the efficiency of the intercooler. And it does a couple of things over time. Oil starts to chafe, like it gets really dry, and with all the other contaminants from the engine, there's also water vapor, and you know, there's even a little bit of dust, even though we can't see it with the naked eye. That all gets thrown back into your engine, and it's going to cause problems. Another thing to note about this engine is oil changes. That's something I've learned. Chrysler Canada and the US have guaranteed that the oil can last up to 16,000 kilometers. The conversion for you guys in the US, I think, is around 10,000 kilometers. And, or sorry, 10,000 miles. And again, on the forum sites, guys have done oil analysis tests, and sure enough, the oil is suitable for, you know, that time frame. However, at first, when I first bought the truck, I wanted to change oil because there was not enough information about it. So I went to my local Chrysler dealership, found out that the oil filter is $75. That's including the O-rings and all the accessories that come with it, because the oil system is a cartridge. The second problem I found out now is that a liter of oil for this truck is $15. $15 a liter. So that would be the equivalent of $150 to do an oil change on this truck. This truck requires 10 liters of oil, and by the time you factor in the labor costs, the oil, the filter, to do an average oil change on this truck would cost you around $250 to $300 at the dealership. So I've done a little bit of research on the oil. The oil is spec'd to meet Chrysler and Fiat specifications. It's also spec'd to meet European standards, which is ACEA. And you guys can search it on Google. It's actually an automobile association that has like a standard of oil, and it tells you the viscosity levels, the phosphorus levels of the oil, the breakdown, what it lubricates, if it protects diesel particulate filters. And the oil that's called for this truck is ACEA -C3, and that's what Chrysler's using. Right now I'm using a synthetic motor oil from Shell. It's called Rotella T6, and it's actually a higher designation area of ACEA-E9. Again, you guys can go on the forum sites, or you guys go on to Google, and you guys can research the differences between the types of oil. But to give you an idea, 5 liters of the Shell Rotella T6 is only $46. So you can buy 2 jugs of that, gives you 10 liters, 90 bucks. And if you can find a deal online for a stock OEM filter, oil filter, you're looking at an average cost now of $150 and it, just in parts itself. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is tuning for this truck. Now, when I first bought the truck, around 3,000 kilometers, I installed the Blue Spark tune. It was a Blue Spark Pro, so that only involved one connection, and that was into the fuel rail system. The connection was literally at the very back of the fuel rail, behind this plastic intake manifold here. So I removed this, and there's one plug that you plug into the fuel rail system, and it changed the parameters of the fueling system. Now, I drove with that for about 5,000 kilometers, almost up to about 10,000 before I had the PCV problem. And I did notice a big difference in fuel economy. The power wasn't so much noticeable, it was the torque. The acceleration, the truck held its RPM a little bit longer. The turbo spooled for greater lengths of time. And I think that has everything to do with changing the fuel tables a little bit. But other than that, it was a lot more responsive. And again, the fuel economy was definitely there. I was getting about 1,024, 1,060 kilometers a tank, whereas now I'm getting about 960 to 1,000 kilometers a tank. And again, that was for long distance driving, mixed city driving as well. It was always consistent. So I did see a loss in fuel consumption. So if anybody's out there doubting the Blue Spark or any other tuning modules, I'm sure they do work. The Blue Spark worked for me. It was fantastic. And I did see a difference in fuel economy. Okay, so now that I've talked about the catch can, the PCV system, the reason why it failed for me is because the catch can I used was extremely small. So the inner diameter of the hose that I was using for the catch can was much smaller than the stock diameter. So what ended up happening is I actually changed the pressures inside the positive crankcase ventilation system and caused the sensor to trip, which evidently caused the system to fail. And the back pressure had to go somewhere, so it went out of my oil pan gasket. Other than that, the truck would have never failed. There was no problems. I was trying to implement something that I used in the past, and it completely failed. So after researching on Google a little bit, I found out that obviously I needed bigger inner diameter tubing for the catch can and a much larger reservoir. So the recommendations out there, and a lot of guys are using it now, is the Provent catch can system. You can search them on Google. Their catch cans are about 300 bucks, but it does do the job. And it works well with our Ecodiesel engines. Okay. So a lot of guys have questions about the air ride suspension that this truck uses. I've mentioned before in the first video that it's actually a nitrogen closed system, and it works very well. It does the job for most average users. The maximum load weight, I believe, is about 1,200 pounds to 2,000 pounds, somewhere in between there. None of us have really ever maxed out or had an issue with the air ride suspension until about 2,000 pounds. To give you an example, I've loaded about, I think, 25 bags, 66 pounds each of cement, and the suspension leveled no problem, and I had no issues driving. You will notice though, on braking and coming to a complete stop, that there is a bit of body lean, and that's just due to the air ride trying to stabilize itself with the weight on the back. Another issue, it's a very small issue obviously I'm going to mention, is the tailgate. For some reason, Chrysler did not install shock absorbers on the tailgate, so this tailgate just drops. There is a modification, it's about 15 bucks. You can put shock dampeners that attach to the stock line here, and it'll prevent the tailgate from slamming down. So I would definitely recommend that if you're looking to purchase this truck. Okay, so now for the Uconnect system. There's been a few changes and some things I've actually missed on my first review, so I'm going to go through them. Since the car got serviced from the PCV valve and it was in for the repairs for the oil pan, I also got the Uconnect system updated and the air suspension. So the major flaw that was with the Uconnect system was the rear backup camera. It was very choppy when it first started up, and there was about a 15 to 20 second delay before it would actually connect. And you'll see in a minute there's a RAM disclaimer that you have to accept. In the previous version of the Uconnect system, you had to hit accept before the backup camera worked. So now they've changed that. You can actually use the backup camera even before you accept the disclaimer. Truck started. So as you can see, there's a disclaimer loading and the backup camera comes in right away. No choppiness, very clear. And as I start reversing, you can see the screens moving in motion without any issues. Before, it was like there was a severe lag in the system. So a couple of settings that I've missed in my previous video was under the safety and driving assistance. So under here I went through most of this stuff, but the key feature that I missed was the hill start assist. Now guys have been complaining about this system. They don't understand exactly how the system works. Hill start assist is pretty much a feature that's built into the ZF transmission. It has nothing to do with your brakes. It's all about a locking system in the transmission that engages when you're up a hill. So if you're at a very steep grade and let's say you're towing a 7,000 pound boat, this hill start assist will lock the vehicle in place while your foot is off the brake. So it's a really good feature if you're, braking downhill and you're traveling long distances and your leg is starting to fatigue. This will take care of all your issues of the car rolling away from you. And again, you can enable it or disable it. The other feature that I wanted to mention that I missed prior was this in the suspension. Now, because this is an air suspension, there are different ways of working on this car. So there is a tire jack mode. So in the event that you have to change a tire, you have to enable this tire jack mode, otherwise the suspension will always try to level itself. And obviously when you have a 2-ton jack underneath your vehicle, you don't want the air suspension moving at all. So you would enable the tire jack mode and it locks the suspension into one set position. You also have transport mode, which I think has more to do with dealers or delivering the car to the customer. But again, you can enable it, and I'm assuming that it'll change your driving parameters and won't let you shift through all the gears, and it controls the speed. The other major feature on this truck that everybody needs to be aware about is the wheel alignment mode. So if you're ever going to do a wheel alignment on your vehicle, obviously a wheel alignment system needs all four wheels to have sensors hooked up onto it, and it needs to be level at all times. You're going to want to enable this mode, that way the suspension is deactivated. That way you can actually successfully complete a four-wheel alignment. In terms of fuel economy, as you can tell after 16,000 kilometers of driving, I'm averaging 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's with two-wheel drive mode enabled at all times. So to give you an idea, I've driven 395 kilometers on this tank. It says I'm averaging 10.1, but I have I've driven 395 kilometers, and I still have another 618 to go. So this truck definitely hits 1,000 kilometers a tank without any issues, And the fuel that I'm using right now is Shell V-Power. I've noticed that V-Power diesel runs much better than other conventional diesel fuels. Another thing to mention is the diesel emissions fluid. A lot of people have a question about the diesel emissions fluid, how long it lasts. So the gauge is right here. Chrysler recommends or states that the diesel emissions fluid will last 12,000 kilometers before refill. My first tank almost ended around 9,000, and I think it has something to do with break-in. Now that I've driven the vehicle for a longer period of time, as you can tell, I've put 8,000 on since my last diesel emissions fluid fill, and I'm still over half a tank. So I think now that I've put more kilometers on the truck, I will start seeing the 12,000 mark for the diesel emissions fluid. So many of you are probably asking why I removed the Blue Spark tune. And there are a few reasons why I've moved it, but I'm going to make another video on that because I feel that it should be in a separate video to explain to you guys the reasons why there's an advantage of having the Blue Spark and the disadvantages of having a Blue Spark.